It's a Tuesday morning, and you're grabbing coffee when your phone lights up with an emergency alert. Armed militias have seized federal buildings in 3 states simultaneously. The stock market crashes 30% before trading halts. Your bank's ATM won't dispense cash. Within 72 hours, interstate commerce grinds to a halt as truckers refuse to cross certain state lines. And suddenly, the grocery store shelves that seemed infinite yesterday are looking bare. Based on current tensions in the US, military analysts and think tanks have actually war-gamed this scenario, and what they found should concern everyone, regardless of where you stand politically. So, what if a second American Civil War started now? Let's start with the uncomfortable truth. America's military is the most powerful fighting force ever assembled, but it's also deeply integrated into every state's infrastructure and economy. The Pentagon employs roughly 3 million people when you count active duty, reserves, National Guard, and civilian contractors. They're spread across more than 4,800 military installations in all 50 states. If conflict erupted, these bases wouldn't just be strategic assets. They'd become immediate flashpoints. Here's where it gets complicated. Unlike 1861, when the division was largely geographical with clear Union and Confederate territories, a modern civil conflict would look nothing like neat battle lines on a map. The actual divide in America today runs through cities, suburbs, and rural areas within the same states. Los Angeles and the California interior, Atlanta and rural Georgia, Austin and the rest of Texas. You'd essentially have urban archipelagos trying to maintain order while surrounding regions potentially aligned differently. The military itself would fracture, though probably not along the lines people expect. A 2021 analysis by the Modern War Institute at West Point examined this exact scenario. The researchers found that unit cohesion would likely trump individual politics initially. A Marine battalion isn't going to split down the middle on day one. But commanders would face impossible choices. Do they follow orders from a federal government that half the country no longer recognizes? Do they protect their home states? History shows us that when these pressures mount, militaries crack along regional and personal loyalty lines, not ideological ones. The National Guard presents an even messier picture. These units are under state control until federalized, which means governors would have immediate military assets. Texas alone has about 23,000 Guard members. California has roughly the same number. Florida maintains around 12,000. But federalizing the Guard requires a functioning federal authority that all sides recognize as legitimate. In a civil war scenario, triggered by disputed election results or constitutional crisis, that legitimacy evaporates. Now let's talk about what really cripples a nation: economics. The 2008 financial crisis, which was just a market failure, cost the U.S. economy an estimated $22 trillion in lost wealth and economic output. A civil war wouldn't just freeze markets temporarily, it would shatter the basic assumptions that make modern economies function. The U.S. dollar serves as the world's reserve currency because of America's stability and military might. If the country descended into internal conflict, foreign holders of U.S. debt, China holds about $850 billion, Japan holds roughly $1.1 trillion, would dump those bonds immediately. The dollar would collapse in value. Your retirement savings, your paycheck, your ability to buy imports, all tied to a currency that just lost its credibility overnight. Supply chains would fail within days. America's just-in-time delivery system means grocery stores typically hold only 3 days of inventory. Most Americans live in cities that produce almost none of their own food. The truck drivers who move 70% of the nation's freight would stop rolling if they couldn't guarantee safe passage or if payment systems failed. Farmers might have crops rotting in fields because they can't get them to market or they're not sure they'll get paid. The power grid represents another critical vulnerability. The U.S. electrical system operates as 3 major interconnected grids: the Eastern Interconnection, the Western Interconnection, and Texas, which famously runs its own. These systems depend on constant coordination and maintenance. A 2020 analysis by the Department of Energy found that targeted attacks on just 9 critical substations could cause a nationwide blackout. In a civil war scenario, those substations become obvious targets, and you don't need missiles to take them down. 4 guys with rifles can disable a substation, as was demonstrated in the 2013 Metcalf attack in California. Water treatment facilities run on electricity. Hospitals run on electricity. Communication networks run on electricity. Modern warfare requires electricity. Within a week of grid failure, cities become unlivable. The US experienced a taste of this during Hurricane Katrina, when New Orleans lost power for weeks. That was one city with the entire rest of the country supporting recovery efforts. Imagine that scenario playing out in dozens of cities simultaneously with no cavalry coming to help. Military technology makes this even more lopsided. The US military's effectiveness depends on integrated systems, satellites, drones, cyber warfare capabilities, smart munitions. The Air Force operates 124 active satellites. The Army depends on GPS for everything from targeting to troop movements. But satellites require ground stations for control and data relay. Those ground stations are spread across the country. If different factions control different stations, or if cyber attacks take them offline, suddenly the world's most sophisticated military is trying to fight with degraded capabilities. Drones have changed warfare fundamentally, but they're useless without the infrastructure to support them. A single Reaper drone requires a ground control station with a satellite connection and a pilot team that's been trained for months. The maintenance alone requires specialized equipment and parts that come from specific factories. Break those supply chains, and the drone fleet gets grounded fast. Then there's the nuclear question that nobody wants to discuss directly, but everyone should be aware of. The United States maintains roughly 5,000 nuclear warheads at various sites across the country. Strategic Command, which controls these weapons, operates under strict protocols specifically designed to prevent unauthorized use. But those protocols assume a functioning chain of command recognized by all parties. In a fractured scenario, you'd have nuclear weapons in different regions, controlled by different factions, all with some claim to legitimacy. It's hard to overstate how dangerous that becomes. The most likely path toward de-escalation would involve the complete paralysis of both sides, honestly. A 2019 paper by military historians studying civil conflicts worldwide found that modern civil wars typically end not through military victory, but through economic exhaustion and mutual recognition that continued fighting destroys everything both sides want to preserve. The American economy is so interconnected that probably within 60 to 90 days, all sides would face complete economic collapse. Starvation in cities, no fuel for military vehicles, no way to pay troops or produce ammunition. Foreign intervention would be almost inevitable, but probably not in the way movies portray. China and Russia wouldn't need to send troops. They'd offer economic lifelines to different factions, gaining influence cheaply. European nations would face their own crisis as the NATO alliance lost its anchor, and their economies, deeply tied to American trade and the dollar, spiraled into recession. Canada and Mexico would see refugee flows on a scale that would make the 2015 European migrant crisis look manageable. We're talking millions of Americans fleeing to stable neighboring countries. The human cost extends beyond combat casualties. The Syrian civil war, which started in 2011, has killed an estimated 600,000 people. Syria's pre-war population was about 22 million. Scale that to America's 335 million, and you're looking at a catastrophic loss of life, most of it from starvation, disease, and infrastructure collapse rather than actual combat. Hospitals run out of medicine, water systems fail, preventable diseases spread. Here's something that often gets overlooked: the internet and communications infrastructure. The US internet backbone consists of major network hubs and data centers concentrated in specific cities. Companies like AT&T, Verizon, and Comcast operate the physical infrastructure, but coordination happens through organizations like ICANN and various internet exchange points. Disrupt those, and suddenly coordinating anything becomes exponentially harder. Modern militaries depend on communications networks that are fundamentally civilian infrastructure operating on trust and cooperation. One realistic scenario that defense analysts have studied involves a slow fracture rather than sudden explosion. State governments gradually stop complying with federal directives. Federal agencies lose the ability to operate in certain regions. Economic activity reorganizes along new regional lines. It's less Fort Sumter and more like the Soviet Union's dissolution, where formal authority became increasingly irrelevant until it simply didn't exist anymore. But unlike the Soviet collapse, which happened in a nuclear power with a far less interconnected economy, an American fracture would send shockwaves through global systems that have no backup plan. The closest historical parallel isn't the First American Civil War, it's probably the Yugoslav wars of the 1990s, where a multi-ethnic federation with a strong military disintegrated into years of brutal conflict that killed over 130,000 people and displaced millions. The difference is, Yugoslavia wasn't the world's largest economy or sole superpower. American collapse would be a global catastrophe, not a regional one. Let's hope we never have to find out if these war games match reality.